Howdy, y'all. Trace Johannesson here, coming to you once again, live from the back patio on Sunday afternoon. A couple things from this week that are noteworthy. Last night, on August 1st, we had a great candidate forum in Sulphur Springs. Miss Sue Evenwell from Titus County and a couple of other county chairs helped to organize and run that, and it went really well. Had a great time with the candidates. There were a lot of really good questions that were asked. One of the topics that came up that I doubled down on were around what should be done about healthcare, and specifically the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. You know, my position, not surprisingly, is that should be repealed and done away with because it's a gross governmental overreach and it's completely rife with government waste. I think philosophically, I believe that healthcare in the U.S. should be a lot more focused on, number one, outcomes. So outcomes based, right, as a one thing. The second one should be more free market. This should be an exchange between my health care provider, my doctor, and myself and ourselves, right? It's way too focused on insurance companies. And lastly, it should be patient focused, right? Everything in the retail and the consumer industry is around, everything should be about a customer experience. Well, this should be about the patient experience. It should be very patient focused. So those were some of the topics that came up, and one of the ones I talked a lot about. Today, I want to talk just a little bit about China. It's been no secret that one of the biggest, pillars of my campaign has been holding China accountable, whether it's for the coronavirus cover-up they did or the lying, but more importantly, it's probably the outright theft of intellectual property from American corporations. How that manifests is in many ways. There are Chinese exchange students who come over and get into programs, and they send all of that information back to the Communist Chinese Party. Recently, I read an article in, I think it was Wall Street Journal, by anyone who's a motorhead or is into cars knows who Steve Saleen is. Does some really amazing work in the automotive industry. And he had entered into a joint venture with a Chinese company with the apparent intent of creating jobs in China. And so Mr. Saleen was upholding his half of the agreement, bringing products to market and starting to develop and hire folks. But his Chinese contingent, they really weren't as serious about it as he was. And he later found that the Chinese part of his partnership had filed over 500 patents in China without referencing him. And it was all of his property. They literally stole his intellectual property. Y'all, that's the exact kind of things that we're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. They need to be held accountable. I think that every president since Jimmy Carter has claimed to hold them accountable, and it's not until very recently, when the Trump administration, where we started to hold China accountable for their actions. And we need to sanction them. And I think finally America, whereas up until recently had been happy to pay or to profit from the lower manufacturing costs, is starting to realize that China itself is a bad actor. And take social media, for example. TikTok is owned by a Chinese company. What is TikTok? Well, it's a platform where folks can post short videos and share that information. Why does that matter? Okay. Well, TikTok being owned by a Chinese company means that they hold all the data and all of the personal information about individuals using the software on their phones, right? Well, why does that matter? Well, that matters because they know all of this personal information. And I know some of you might be saying, well, wait, doesn't Facebook sell a bunch of information? They do, but they sell depersonalized information in aggregate. It's kind of like if I was trying to understand trends in healthcare industry. If I wanted to be within HIPAA requirements, I would depersonalize and aggregate the information so that I can make decisions on certain population sets. China is not doing that. They're absolutely bad actors, and they have to be held accountable. There is nothing. It is largely recognized that China is a bad actor, and they're stealing our IP left and right. Let's talk a little bit about education for a second. One of the topics that came up last night was, which departments would you consider defunding and why for cutting government spending. And there are many, but the Department of Education comes to mind to me, for example, because we have a bureaucracy which exists at a federal level that is trying to dictate how schools should be teaching, right? There are too many standards and too many standardized tests. What does that mean? That means that our smart teachers aren't able to do what they need to do because they're busy teaching towards a test. And oh, by the way, now we have yet another government bureaucracy, which is just like a self-licking ice cream cone existing to exist itself. So what needs to happen is a more limited government approach to where we shrink down the Department of Education to a much, much leaner organization, which allocates funds to state and local levels where it's needed, rather than mandating how standards are done. Look, at the college level, there are accreditation processes and standards, and the same kind of concept can be brought to primary education. The No Child Left Behind Act, we need to get rid of a lot of tenets of that. It is largely any gains that are attributed to the No Child Left Behind Act are contested, and it's excess legislation doesn't need to be there. We've got a couple of quick questions here. John Lopez. So the answer is yes. I talked about this a minute ago. There was a virtual debate. It was less of a debate, more of a panel. The format was great. There were 16 of the, I don't know how many, 50 candidates we have now. 16 of us showed up, and we're broken into four-person groups and asked a series of questions with some time limits, which I thought was a very efficient way of doing it. We didn't know what the questions were in advance, and no one was allowed to watch those. But there will be, John, a replay. It'll be posted on one of the Facebook pages. I don't recall which one, but I'll post on that later, and I'll definitely reshare that when it comes up so y'all can see. But I thought it was a very well-run candidate forum. And there were quite a few party precinct chairs in attendance, so it was really well attended. Also from John, on healthcare, what executive orders last month, what do you think about the order pursuing the middlemen or the pharmacy benefit managers who were omitted from HR 3? I haven't read up on that executive order, but I will say that in general, I like the idea of eliminating middlemen in general, especially where the healthcare industry is insurance company focused, right? We need to get back to where we as patients are working directly with our doctors, and we're kind of minimizing the amount of insurance we need. So I'm all about getting rid of the middlemen. But as far as pharmacy benefits managers and HR 3, I'm not totally familiar with that legislation, but I'll look into it. Other than that, I hope everyone has a great week. This is the last broadcast before the actual voting that happens next Saturday in Sulphur Springs on August 8th. And at that point, we will all know who the next Republican candidate on the ballot for the general election to replace John Ratcliffe will be. I hope that all the folks I've talked to and got to know will think that I'm a great candidate, that I will be a good statesman doing the right thing, maybe not the popular thing, but the thing that is in our best interests and represent us well in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much, y'all. Enjoy the rest of your week.